What is your favorite Beach Boys single? It's a pity that we don't have one huge collection with every single one in it, because then it would be very easy to go through and listen to all the wonderful songs the group has made, see some of those experiments that didn't pan out, etc. The Beach Boys have such a long and diverse recording career that there's a lot to be said, even just for their 45s and not for their albums. I say this because the closest we ever got in the United States to having a collection of Beach Boys singles is this box set from 2008. The Beach Boys U.S. Singles Collection, the capital years, 1962 to 1965. This set was released in summer of 2008 and today is mostly forgotten, despite having a couple very interesting exclusive tracks. It might be best remembered today for its bizarre packaging. So it's this little cube. You lift off the top of it. It was actually attached to the back by a sticker. I bought this secondhand. The person before me obviously didn't have too much patience and just kind of yanked it off. And you have this little holder here that contains several CDs. Each CD only has a few songs on it, with one exception, which we'll talk about later. And those are to replicate the original singles. Now the bottom of mine is kind of busted off, like this would sit on top of that, and the cover would go over it, but you can see it's kind of been damaged. Again, I think the person before me kind of tore this apart trying to open it. It's a very interesting idea for a set too. Now other groups have complete singles collections. Here's my very banged up copy of the Gary Lewis and the Playboys collection. But these are just two discs, A-side, B-side, A-side, B-side, all the way through their discography. Occasionally there's something that was like an alternate B-side or a promotional single, that kind of thing, or a bonus track. Other groups like CCR have the same deal. Very seldom do we see, okay, here's a CD that replicates the original 45. I think the Beatles have a set like this, but the Beatles' discography is much, much smaller than the Beach Boys one. So it'd be easier to do something like this. And ultimately, I think what kind of dooms this set for many people, at least in the pre-digital days, was just the idea of having all these discs with really next to nothing on them. Very unusual choice. The UK got a special box set back in the 80s that was all just the 45 singles from the early 60s up through 1969. It's a really cool set. I wish I had one. You can sometimes find them floating around on eBay. They have really bizarre 1980s artwork that I think is way overly sexualized for the songs, but this is the closest the US ever got to something like that. So if you wanted just Beach Boys 45s, this is the best you're going to get. Let's take a quick look at the liner notes in this very bizarre fold-out pamphlet, which goes disc by disc, because not everything's just A-side, B-side, as we'll talk about. There are definitely some changes here. And then the actual liner notes there at the bottom. Going through, there were several tracks that, when this was released, were unavailable elsewhere. A lot of that has changed, but there's still a couple that remain exclusive. And then here's the other side of that. You can see kind of a surfboard-ish design and a nice picture of the boys at the bottom. A very unusual choice for how to design your liner notes, but not the most unusual we've seen on this channel for sure. It also came with, as advertised on the top of the box there, a small picture book. Oops, taking out my CDs there. With this kind of beachy sand texture. It's actually really nice, but if you open it up there, I'll show you a few pages like I do with other booklets and stuff. Images of the group from the time period, and also these weird kind of translucent pages. Let's see if I can kind of hold one up for you. They have like an etching on them. Really interesting. There's several of those throughout the book. Here's another one there, Mike's face. So interesting stuff, and it's a nice little book, a nice little display piece. There's no like text, no information, no interviews, that kind of thing, but there's enough to kind of make for a Beach Boys, almost like an ornament, I guess you'd say, something you'd maybe put on your shelf more for decoration than anything else. Little Honda there. We'll go to the penultimate page. So, interesting stuff there. A little decorative book, a wacky liner notes pamphlet, and a box with kind of a bizarre design structure. This was marketed and presented as a special edition in some of the promotional materials. So I'm not sure if there was ever an intention for there to be a sequel. We'll talk more about this later in the video, but I think a sequel would actually have been a wise idea. But let's go ahead and take a look at what's actually inside this box. Now, the Beach Boys' very first single, Surfin', was not a Capital One. It was released through the X label and later through the Candix label. If you watch my video on Best of the Beach Boys Volume 3, you might remember, as Capitol had to license that song specially for inclusion on this record, there's that little notice that says, Surfin', you know, licensed through Guild Recordings and blah blah blah, all this kind of legalese stuff there. So apparently whoever was in charge thought it was best just skip Surfin'. Not, you know, a Capitol single, not really what we need right now. So instead, we start with the Beach Boys' first Capitol single and their breakout song, Let's Go Surfin' Now, Everybody's Learning How. Come on a safari with me. Backed with 409, of course. This first disc contains a mono mix of Surfin' Safari, along with a mono mix of 409, and then a live take of 409. Surfin' Safari was not mixed into stereo until 2022, when it was released as part of the Sounds of Summer box set there. And until there were fan mixes before that, I should say, but up till that point it's only available officially in mono and in duophonic as well. 409 has never been officially mixed to stereo and remains mono or duophonic on some of the older releases. So it's kind of neat to see both these here together, but we don't get anything wild and different. We just get kind of the mono singles. The other track is a live take of 409. That would later be re-released as it was part of their 1965 Live in Chicago tour. This was touted to be Beach Boys in Concert Part 2, which ultimately didn't happen, but here Mike Love tells the audience to take a deep breath and exhale at the same time, which they don't do very well, and then the group sings 409. So at the time, it was an exclusive track on this CD, but it's since been released digitally on that digital collection. So 3 songs on the first CD, Surfin' Safari, 409, and a live take of 409. CD number 2, a forgotten single from the group, 10 Little Indian Boys. 10 Little Indians was actually a decent charting hit. It broke the top 50, but today it's kind of been erased from time because it's not the sort of song, I guess, that the group would do live or would really be associated with them. It does pop up in a few weird places, like 20 Golden Greats Volume 2, the 25th Anniversary Cassette Collection, and the weird Pickwick record from the 70s that was a showcase of their early material. It's on here as well. But for a charting single, it's kind of surprising that we don't really see it more places. 10 Little Indians is sort of based on the nursery rhyme, but unlike some of those big band leaders who came before the Beach Boys who did a straight musical adaptation of it, this has different lyrics and so on. I think Brian kind of started with the nursery rhyme and expanded it into his own kind of pop idea. It also includes the B-side, County Fair, Hurry, Hurry, Step Right Up, Test Your Strength. Both from the Surfin' Safari album, 2 of the more childish cuts. As a third bonus track, the song Punchline is included. Punchline was previously released on the Good Vibrations box set back in 1993. Just a fun instrumental with the Beach Boys doing all this wacky laughter and so on. It's a nice inclusion here. I don't know that it was ever released on a single anywhere. It's kind of cool to have this for historical purposes, but there's nothing essential here. I don't think anybody's going to be defending 10 Little Indians as a forgotten Beach Boys gem anytime soon. The rest of the set basically follows a pattern. mono A-side, mono B-side, stereo A-side, stereo B-side. Some of these stereo mixes were brand new at the time. Others had been previously released on other sets. Remember, in the early 60s, mono was pretty much the only way to listen to your favorite songs, and stereo and duophonic and whatnot would kind of come into vogue later. But we have their first, big, almost chart-topping single, Surfin' USA, backed with Shut Down. There is nothing about this 45 that I can't say already. 2 songs that charted very well, 2 songs that were in the live set for decades, 2 songs that are well loved by fans. Of course, I have the real 45 of it as well, in a similar sleeve, not quite the same. It's nice to hear them in mono and stereo, but if you were listening to this on a CD player back in the day, I could see where that would get kind of boring maybe. And I'm assuming you'd want one that could hold multiple discs and then could shuffle between them so you can mix up your playlist a little bit. But if you're looking for a good way to compare the two very quickly, this works pretty well. Next one up, oops, that's not the right one. Following a similar pattern, we have Surfer Girl and Little Deuce Coupe. Again, mono, mono, stereo, stereo. It's often forgot that Little Deuce Coupe was a B-side. I believe it's the highest charting B-side of their entire career, and a song that, after all, with an album named after it and everything else, has kind of transcended, oh, it's just the Back to Surfer Girl. No, no, no. It is now a very popular song in its own right. So another nice single to have, and again, at the time, having all these songs in mono and stereo on one disc could be handy if you wanted to do some comparisons. Our next disc, Be True to Your School, backed with In My Room. Here we actually change things up a little bit. We have the single version of Be True to Your School in mono, followed by In My Room, also in mono. Then we have the album mix of Be True to Your School. So if on the Surfer Girl LP, Be True to Your School was released without the Honeys as the cheerleaders, with a different vocal by Mike Love and so on. And that version has never been mixed into stereo as far as I know, officially. Even on the 60th anniversary box set, it's I believe the only track on the set that remains in mono. So it's very interesting that they either can't mix the stereo or choosing not to. They might not have all the necessary assets or whatever. The single version is much more popular, appears on most of the greatest hits packages and so on, but the album version without the Honeys as the cheerleaders is on Endless Summer and a few other places, so it's interesting, I think, to have them both right here. In My Room is in both mono and in stereo as well, and I do have a real Be True to Your School single, just for posterity. Mine's pretty scratched up there, but it is indeed there, so you can have it kind of stereo A and B side, but not quite. Next disc, for just in time for Christmas, be Little Saint Nick and the Lord's Prayer, both presented in mono and stereo. The Little Saint Nick stereo version was making its debut here. Remember, the single version of Little Saint Nick uses the glockenspiel, has kind of a punchier arrangement. The Lord's Prayer one, that was never released on an LP until the 1980s. We talked about this more so in the Christmas video that I did about Beach Boys Christmas releases. And Little Saint Nick, the stereo single, you can find in other places like Christmas Harmonies and so on. Then we have Fun, 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 backed with Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Fun, Fun, Fun is presented in mono and in stereo. Why Do Fools Fall in Love is presented in mono twice, but it uses 2 different edits. There were several tapes that were discovered that have to do with the recording of that song sometime in the early mid-2000s. That's why we have so many different mixes and sessions and whatnot for the song. For example, on Summer Love Songs in 2009, they released a special version with a piano intro that had never been heard before. But this one opts to do something different. This is only a year before. And so for Why Do Fools Fall in Love, they release a version that opens with the Beach Boys singing, Why do fools fall in love? And then they go into the doom bop, doom bop, doom bop. So it has a vocal intro instead of a piano or the drum crash or other things that we hear in different takes. This is interesting because when the group did it live for their 50th anniversary, this was the sort of arrangement they used. They started with the vocals, with the title of the song, I guess you would say, sung kind of a cappella, and then jump into the song. So even though this is, as far as I know, still unique to this set, this alternate edit does indeed have a legacy. It does indeed influence the way the group does the song live. Why Do Fools Fall in Love? We talked at length about when we talked about 2014's Keep an Eye on Summer. Here is where you can find all those sessions, and they do a stereo mix and so on, all kinds of different things. I guess it's one of those songs that's up there with Cool Cool Water and Breakaway and other releases like that, where there's so many different takes and versions and edits that after a while it's like, who knows what you're listening to. Next up on our list, I Get Around, backed with Don't Worry Baby. So they copied the picture sleeve, but rather than do it like a generic capital sleeve or sort of like a flip-flopped A-B side, they have this backing image here. I'll leave it up for you for a second. We get I Get Around in mono, Don't Worry Baby in mono, the I Get Around backing track, and then Don't Worry Baby in stereo. Really interesting. We've heard the I Get Around backing track before. That was on the Good Vibrations box set. But it's nice to hear it again here. And as a #1 single, the group's first chart topper, kind of surprising we don't get a new stereo mix, but maybe they just want something kind of different. Next up, When I Grow Up to Be a Man, backed with She Knows Me Too Well. Both of these songs are on Beach Boys Today. When I Grew Up to Be a Man was a pretty big hit in its own right and has remained a live staple and so on. She Knows Me Too Well bubbled under the Hot 100, but I think the song's lyrics about emotional abuse and kind of its unusual arrangement, it was certainly unlike anything else at the time. A lot of people say it seems like a proto-Pet Sounds track, and that's a very fair assessment. Probably maybe alienated some of their audience, but it does have its fans, and it does pop up in a few different places, like the Good Vibrations box set, Best of the Beach Boys Volume 3, and so on. So it's nice to have it here, and both are presented in mono, and both are presented in stereo. At that time, the Beach Boys Today album hadn't been remixed into stereo, so it was probably good for collectors to pick this up, just to have those. Next one up on our list, we have the EP, 4 by the Beach Boys. This is one I've talked about before in my video, a quick one, where we talk about Beach Boys EP releases. 4 by the Beach Boys, one of the few EPs to be released in the US. There are quite a few interesting ones from overseas, but only a handful. We've had some digital ones here and there, and so on. But here, Wendy, Little Honda, Don't Back Down, and Hushabye were released as an EP, just to kind of maybe promote or supplement the All Summer Long album. It's a nice little collection, and by EP standards, I think it did pretty well, but just didn't really catch on. So here we get all 4 songs in mono, all 4 in stereo. So we have 8 songs, more than any other on this, or in this particular collection. Fun little release to have, and I'm glad they didn't just stick to 45s, you know, and whatnot, that they were nice enough to include the EP. I think that was a good choice. Next up, we got another Christmas one. Here's the Man with all the toys backed with I'll Have a Blue Christmas. Now that the snow came back, feels right to be talking about this. Both are presented in mono and in stereo. This one didn't catch on the way Little Saint Nick did, sadly, but the Man with All the Toys is still a big fan favorite. And I'm glad that they included it here and didn't just write off the Christmas ones. Next disc up. Here is Dance, 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 back with The Warmth of the Sun. I think a couple of mine got flipped around in the box. Sorry about that. But we are going to cover all of them. Dance, Dance, Dance was a big chart success back in the day. The Warmth of the Sun's a big fan favorite. It never actually charted, at least not in the 1960s, but it was released on their first Greatest Hits package, and it is a big live staple nowadays. I don't think they did it live in the 60s, or if they did, not till the late 60s, but it's a nice inclusion. Both presented in mono and in stereo. Very nice. Next one up here. Do You Want to Dance? Backed with Please Let Me Wonder. So this set's also a little bit different. It has the other exclusive track to this set, which is the backing track to Do You Want to Dance. It's presented in mono, and then we get the backing track, and Please Let Me Wonder is in both mono and stereo. An interesting choice, but this is the only place to get that instrumental if you want it. Like some other instrumentals, like How She Boogalooed It and Sail on Sailor, the lyrics come back for the end, the vocals come back for the end of it, but the instruments are predominant throughout it, that kind of thing. Pretty cool stuff. Almost there. Next up, here's Help Me Rhonda and Kiss Me Baby. This, again, doesn't necessarily stick to the mono, stereo pattern we've been seeing. We get mono Help Me Rhonda, mono Kiss Me Baby, then we get the backing track to Help Me Rhonda. That had been previously released on the Beach Boys Party / Stacko tracks. Whoops. Two for there. You can see on the back my jewel case fell apart on me. When I did my Stacko tracks video, I wish I'd taken more time to talk about the bonus tracks, which we got several of those for Stacko tracks, but sadly they weren't on the vinyl version. So here we get the backing track for Help Me Rhonda, which is a nice inclusion. A couple more to go. California Girls and Let 'Em Run Wild. Brian Wilson famously disliked Let 'Em Run Wild, but it is a big fan favorite today. This is just mono, stereo again. Not much I can say about California Girls that hasn't been said already. And our final disc is sort of a bonus kind of hodgepodge job here. We have All Dressed Up for School. That had been released before on Little Deuce Coupe / All Summer Long, 2 for CD. Oh, that one didn't break. But it's good to have it here. All Dressed Up for School, of course, sort of a precursor to songs like The Little Girl I Once Knew, and also musically a precursor to things like I Just Got My Pay and Marcella. We have the alternate mix of I'm So Young. That was previously released on the Beach Boys Today and Summer Days and Summer Nights 2 for disc there. Has a different intro and so on. Different than the album version. We have the alternative single of Help Me Rhonda with extra falsetto vocals. That was released on 1998's Endless Harmony soundtrack. And lastly, we have the stereo version of Graduation Day, also released on the Today, Summer Days and Summer Nights set. Graduation Day was a big live staple for the group, but they never released the stereo version. This is available on a few other sets as well, but it's kind of nice to have it here, I think. A nice fitting end to the set, and we get a special hidden track. There's some sessions. The group rehearsing a lyric that goes, she's so fine, she's so fine. We hear some tape rewind noises, and someone yells at Carl Wilson his guitar fell over in the studio. Not sure what they were rehearsing or what those tapes are from, but it's kind of nice to have a little bonus hidden track here. And that is the whole set. Sorry if they weren't in perfect order, but sometimes they get jostled around the box if I'm looking for one or two particular ones, or a few times I accidentally grabbed the wrong thing. So it doesn't cover all of 1965, sadly. We don't see The Little Girl I Once Knew, or one of their biggest hits, Barbara Ann, which went all the way to #2 in late 1965. So presumably if there had been a second volume, a sequel, we would have been able to see things from Pet Sounds, from Smile, from Wild Honey, anything from that mid to late 60s time span. But I'm thinking one of the reasons might have been the invention of the Brother Records label. Here's Heroes and Villains, which was not released through Capitol, but through Brother. And that would maybe be one more step that whoever was in charge would have to jump through to make sure this set could see release. Not to mention, with just all those CDs with just a couple songs here and there, not really practical for the average listener. Someone who's maybe studying the music or is an insane completist like me would want this set, but it's hard to mass market something that's just so unusually designed. Not to mention all the materials used, and it's not really a feasible set. It does look nice. I wish the packaging was a little more I don't know. I want to say eco-friendly, but I also want to say practical. Maybe neither of those is really the adjective I want. But the point is, I think they could have done a slightly better job designing that package. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this box set or on the Beach Boys singles? Stay tuned in 2024 for more Beach Boys content and movie content as well. Hope to see you there. Have a good one.